Cold, fizzy. That slight bitter bite at the back of your throat. Beer has been around for over 5,000 years, but what started as a simple mix of grain and water is now made in massive facilities running around the clock, producing millions of cans and bottles every day. The real story isn't just the scale, though. It's how raw barley gets transformed into that crisp, carbonated drink in your hand, and the surprising amount of science behind every step. Beer may seem diverse, but at its core, it's built from just 4 main ingredients: water, malted barley, hops, and yeast. Water makes up about 90 to 95% of beer, and its mineral content has a big impact on flavor. Historically, different regions produce distinct styles because of their water. Malted barley provides much of the beer's color and body, but also the sugars that yeast turns into alcohol. During malting, the grain is sprouted and dried, preparing those sugars for fermentation. Hops add bitterness to balance the sweetness of the malt, along with aromas ranging from citrusy to earthy. They also help preserve the beer. And yeast is what drives the whole process, converting sugar into alcohol and carbonation, while also shaping the beer's flavor. Different yeast strains can produce noticeably different flavor profiles. Just 4 ingredients, combined in different ways to create an enormous range of beers, produced at a massive industrial scale. The production process begins with barley and a stage called malting, before the beer is actually brewed. Raw barley is cleaned and soaked in water, allowing it to absorb moisture and begin sprouting. As it germinates, the grain develops enzymes that will later convert its stored starch into sugars that yeast can use. After a few days, germination is stopped by drying the barley in a kiln, a large heated chamber that removes moisture and stabilizes the grain. This step locks everything in place and shapes the flavor. Lighter kilning produces pale, mild malts, while higher temperatures create darker malts with richer flavors like caramel or toast. Large breweries tightly control their barley supply to ensure consistency. Companies like Heineken source specific, standardized varieties from approved growers around the world. At the brewery, the dried malt is milled, cracked open to expose the starchy interior, while keeping the husk mostly intact. That husk will later act as a natural filter. The crushed grain, now called grist, is then ready for the next stage. The grist moves into a large vessel called a mash tun, where it's mixed with hot water. This step, called mashing, is where the key conversion happens. The heat activates enzymes in the grain, which break down starch into sugars that yeast can later ferment. Brewers carefully control the temperature, usually between 145 to 158 degrees Fahrenheit, 63 and 70 degrees Celsius, because it affects the balance of sugars. Lower temperatures tend to produce a lighter, drier beer, while higher temperatures create a fuller body with a slightly sweeter finish. After about an hour, the liquid portion of the mash, called wort, needs to be separated from the spent grain. This happens in a vessel called a lauter tun, where the grain bed settles and acts as a natural filter. The wort drains through the bottom, while hot water is sprayed over the grain to rinse out any remaining sugars. The leftover grain isn't wasted. It's typically collected and reused as animal feed, a sustainable byproduct that large breweries like Modelo's parent company Constellation Brands actively manage as part of their environmental commitments. The collected wort then moves into the brew kettle, where it's brought to a vigorous boil for about 60 to 90 minutes. This step serves several important purposes at once. It sterilizes the wort, removing unwanted microorganisms before fermentation. It also drives off volatile compounds that could cause off flavors, and it concentrates the wort by evaporating some of the water. At the same time, heat-driven reactions deepen the color and begin to develop the beer's flavor. Hops are added at different points during the boil, and timing determines their impact. Early additions mainly contribute bitterness. Later additions preserve more of the hop's natural aroma, adding notes like citrus, floral, herbal, or pine. Beers like Bud Light use a restrained hop profile to maintain a mild bitterness and clean, neutral finish. Modelo. A special uses a different blend and timing of hops, giving it a slightly more noticeable hop character. Once the boil is complete, the wort moves into a whirlpool tank, where it's spun in a circular motion, causing hop particles and proteins to gather into a dense cone at the center. The clear wort is then drawn off from the sides, leaving the solids behind. Next, the hot wort needs to be cooled rapidly before yeast can be added. This is done using a heat exchanger, which brings the temperature down from near boiling to fermentation levels in just minutes. For lagers like Heineken, Modelo, and Bud Light, fermentation happens at lower temperatures, typically around 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 7 to 13 degrees Celsius. This colder process helps create a cleaner, smoother flavor. Once the wort has been cooled, yeast is added in carefully measured quantities. The yeast begins feeding on the sugars in the wort, producing alcohol and carbon dioxide as byproducts. Fermentation takes place in large vessels called fermenters or fermentation tanks. They're equipped with cooling jackets that keep fermentation at the right temperature. They're also designed to capture the carbon dioxide produced during fermentation, which is often reused later in the brewing process. After about 1 to 2 weeks, most of the sugar has been converted, and the beer has developed its core alcohol content and flavor. After primary fermentation, the beer still needs time to mature. This stage is called lagering, or conditioning. The word lager comes from the German word lagern, meaning to store, reflecting the old practice of keeping beer in cold cellars for weeks or months so it could mature and clarify. In modern industrial breweries, conditioning happens in large conditioning tanks, usually at temperatures just above freezing. At these cold temperatures, yeast and haze-forming particles slowly settle out, helping the beer become cleaner and clearer. The yeast also keeps working on removing leftover byproducts from fermentation, especially diacetyl, which can give beer an unwanted buttery taste, considered a flaw in most lager styles. Conditioning can last anywhere from a few weeks to much longer, depending on the style and brewery schedule. Mass-market lagers are usually conditioned for less time, while some premium lagers spend longer developing a smoother flavor. After conditioning, the beer still contains yeast, proteins, and other tiny particles that can make it look hazy. Before packaging, it goes through filtration. Large breweries often use filters that catch those particles while letting the clear beer pass through. Some breweries still use a fine mineral powder made from fossilized microorganisms to filter the beer, while others use membrane systems with very small openings to do the same job. Once filtered, the beer becomes bright and clear. Its carbonation is adjusted if needed, and it goes through a final quality check before packaging. The finished beer moves to the packaging hall, where it's filled into bottles, cans, or kegs at very high speed. Before filling, the containers are cleaned and rinsed. Glass bottles go through a washer that uses hot cleaning solution, while cans are rinsed before they're filled. The beer is filled in a way that keeps oxygen out, because even small amounts can make beer go stale and develop cardboard-like flavors. Most large breweries use counter-pressure filling, which adds carbon dioxide first, so the beer can go in smoothly without foaming too much. After filling, bottles are capped and cans are sealed shut. The containers then go through a pasteurization tunnel, where they get heated for a short period to kill any remaining microorganisms and extend shelf life. Heineken uses a slightly different approach for some of their products: flash pasteurization, where the beer gets heated before filling rather than after, which some brewers believe better preserves the fresh flavor of the beer. Finally, the containers move through labeling machines, date coding systems, and inspection stations before being grouped into 6-packs, 12-packs, or cases and loaded onto pallets for distribution. Before we wrap up, here are a few beer industry facts that show just how big and complex this world really is. Heineken works hard to keep its water profile consistent across breweries, so a beer brewed in one country tastes very similar to one brewed somewhere else. Bud Light is also produced at multiple facilities across the United States, and keeping that flavor consistent batch after batch takes strict standards, careful testing, and tight coordination between breweries. Modelo's brewery in Mexico is one of the largest single-site breweries in the world, producing beer on a scale that's hard to imagine. The hops used in commercial brewing also come from a few major regions, including Washington State, Bavaria, the Czech Republic, and New Zealand, with breweries relying on long-term supply relationships to keep flavors consistent. Yeast management is another hidden part of the process. Major breweries keep dedicated labs to maintain their yeast strains, and Heineken's A yeast has been preserved for well over a century. And finally, the carbon dioxide produced during fermentation is often captured, purified, and reused later in the brewing process, making the system more efficient and sustainable. So there you have it. This is how beer is made in a factory. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We've got more factory tours, food science, and myth-busting breakdowns on the way. Until next time, thanks for watching.